Off the couch where psychology meets everyday life. I'm Dr. Greg Cason here with producer Brian Gomez.
Happy Monday, you guys.
And we have Jamie on the board.
Hello, hello.
And today we're going to be talking about Lyle and Eric Menendez. We're going to be talking about the Menendez brothers because I was brought into this because in the LA Times they had a full-page ad, Justice for Eric and Lyle. So I was forced to watch the current phenomenon that's on Netflix, Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story by Ryan Murphy. It's part of his trilogy of murderous stories. And I was brought back to a time because I was here in LA when all of that went down. And I was actually in school when all of that went down, which actually played a pivotal role in my understanding of the case. So, Brian, you watched the show.
Yes, I started it. I feel like everybody was talking about it. There's billboards everywhere around town about it. You know, it's a big case, you know. So it just made sense, and especially with us always talking about mental health and everything, and it's a big part of it.
Well, it's an interesting case. It's one of those LA celebrity cases because they were a superstar family here in Los Angeles. I had no awareness of them, but they were very wealthy. He worked, I believe, for RCA Records. He signed bands like Menudo and many others. He was the president, I believe, of Hertz Rent-A-Car. Hired OJ to do their commercials. So he was Jose Menendez, the father, the scion of the family, was really quite a significant personality. So, when his two good-looking boys, 18 and 21, Eric was 18 and Lyle was 21, took two shotguns and shot not only their father but their mother in their television viewing room, then that made national news. And then that became a big story. So let's talk about that. So in the show, they really talk about, so it all happened August 20th, 1989. So August 20th, 1989, just to let you know where I was in my life, I was just starting school. I was in the very first start of my school. So this was national news, but it was LA news. I mean, it was big deal here in LA because you never saw things like this come out of Beverly Hills. Wealthy family, murder, the scary stuff go down. So we all started to wonder what's really happening here. And the show itself actually starts in such an interesting way, such a creepy way from moment one that really sets the tone for the show, because Ryan Murphy's show starts with the funeral, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just seems you feel like it's just off, like how it's happening here. Something just feels weird about it. Incredibly
off. Eric, they're in the limousine on the way, I guess, to the memorial, and he's looking down at his brother's feet, and he says, "Are you wearing Dad's shoes?" And then Lyle loses his temper at some point, and then we get into the actual memorial itself, and Lyle gives a speech, this really, compelling speech, and he ends it with Milli Vanilli's song, "Girl, I'm Gonna Miss You." And "Girl, I'm Gonna Miss You," just so you know, didn't that give you the creeps? Had you even heard that song, Brian?
No, but I thought it was weird. It was just weird for the funeral.
Really sure. Weird. I mean, I knew it from the start. These are the lyrics. I knew it from the start. "You would break my heart, but I still had to play this painful part. You wrapped me round your little bitty finger with your magic smile. You kept me hanging on a lover's cross a while. You put your spell on me, took my breath away." I mean, this is a breakup song for lovers.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, I don't know if this would be the appropriate place to play this.
So what they seemed to do with Lyle almost immediately was portray aspects of what we'll talk about, which is sociopathy.
Well, it makes sense because you see, like you mentioned in the car when Eric asks Lyle about the dad's shoes, Eric, you can see, is breaking down. He's having the cracks from the pressure of it all.
Yeah.
You can see he's starting to break, and then Lyle turns on him and starts pretty much like almost manipulating him to get it together, to stay focused, to stay on the same plan that they kind of were on, you know?
Yeah.
And even when they get out of the limo and instead of going in the back of the dock when they're supposed to, they get dropped off in the front because Lyle's making a big situation about it. And he just seems like a hardcore asshole where you're just like, oh, this is the problem right here.
Yeah, you certainly get that feeling. So to really understand this, though, you kind of have to back up to understand the family and what was going on with the family. So in the show, the family itself, which is portrayed, these two young, good-looking actors play Lyle and Eric Menendez. Chloe Sevigny plays the mother, Kitty Menendez. And then, who's the actor who plays Javier Bardem, I think, plays the father?
I think so.
And does an excellent job. But let's talk about the parents and the family and what was going on there if we back up into the family. So if you've seen the episodes, I think that Ryan Murphy achieved something very interesting because he named it Monsters, so you're going in assuming they're talking about Lyle and Eric Menendez. But they soon show you pretty much everyone has their own aspect of being a monster. So as the show goes on, they have the two sons did murder their parents. You have the two parents who we're going to talk about, Father Jose and Mother Kitty, and what kind of aspects they show that might attribute to being a monster. We had a therapist who did not act in an ethical way, who acted monstrously, as well as his girlfriend. And we had police who did not act well during this, as well as a DA who did not act well and was looking at this, and that was Gil Garcetti at the time, I believe. Everything was lined up in a particular way, and even the judge acted in such a way that you started to think, this monster label could apply to just about everybody. So I thought that was a clever title in some ways. But let's back up and talk about the family. The family starred, can you believe I just said that, to an overbearing parent. That was Jose Menendez. He had authoritarian control, and he fostered psychological issues in the brothers almost from day one. He was in absolute control of them, and then he was trying to push them to be something more than what he saw. So he was always pushing them, always riding them. Also, in their family, there was emotional neglect that happened in the family. I think this was illustrated kind of interestingly because both Lyle and Eric talk about that they had to do things to make their father love them, that it was all conditional, 100% conditional. And the only time it's that, like Eric, I think, portrays in the series, but certainly in other aspects, certainly in his, certainly on the stand when he was giving testimony, because I've watched some of those as well, is that he said that was the only time that he had with his father that was special, when his father was abusing him. And what kind of abuse did his father do? Well, I think that I'm not going to pull the lead because I think bury the lead because everybody who's watched the show or is familiar with the story knows that the boys accuse Jose and Eric of being sexually molested by their father. With Lyle, the older brother, he was sexually molested from age 6 through 8. And then apparently told his father to stop doing it, and his father did. And then his father went to Eric, who was 6 at the time, and started molesting him, and continued to molest Eric till he was 18, until the murder.
Damn. It's just crazy because you think of stuff like that, and it's like, dude, that's a monster. The dad is a monster. Like, just for doing, like, there's no way around that, you know?
You know, it's interesting. I was watching something else, and the prosecutor of the case, the original prosecutor, the female who was in the first case, because there were two trials. The first of Lila and Eric ended in mistrials, and then the second one they were convicted. But the prosecutor in the first trials, both Lila and Eric, she said that they could not find anyone who would say something positive about Jose except his secretary. Like, there was nobody that they could find. That's pretty trippy. You usually can find someone.
And then I'm kind of wondering about, like, well, why is the secretary the only person that could say something nice?
Well, it is interesting to me, but sometimes, and we're going to talk a little bit about this personality style, but sometimes there's a personality style that they will bring certain people into the fold and treat them well because they need a confidant. They need someone to kind of work off of.
That makes sense, and that's their right hand, pretty much. So they would have to be nice to them.
But in the show, they portray, you know, that Jose is continually teaching his boys values that maybe are not conducive with leading a happy, normal life. He's extremely demanding of them. He expects perfection. He wanted Lyle to go to Princeton, which he did. He would tell them you can lie, cheat, and steal, but he says, lie, cheat, and steal, but do not fucking get caught. And that was I think, the shocking thing is that he groomed these boys for the actions they took later.
Damn, so the monster created monsters, pretty much.
But let's talk about Jose Menendez. Now, of course, I've not worked with him. I'm not giving him a diagnosis per se, but I'm going to talk about diagnostic personality possibilities for all of these people because I think this plays into a dynamic that isn't unusual. The first, which we've talked about before, is the dark triad personality. Dark triad personality is... it's something that it's represented by three personality aspects. Two of them we diagnose, which is psychopathy or sociopathy or antisocial personality disorder and narcissism. But it also includes something called Machiavellianism. So psychopathy is being impulsive, emotionally cold, remorseless. Narcissism, grandiosity, perceived superiority, entitlement, which there was a lot of that in this family. And Machiavellianism, which is being manipulative, self-interested, and domineering. And this person can really wreak a lot of havoc on other people. And the dark triad personality really could help explain why Kitty was in the position that she was. So Kitty, his wife, one wonders in these kinds of abuse situations how a wife could sit back while this is going on. I mean, how does she not know? I think that's a very common question. How does the mother not know?
And it sucks because I feel like in like real situations when this is happening, when a parent is abusing a child, the other parent usually doesn't know, you know, or somehow turns a blind eye to it. I feel like it happens a lot now.
It's always a good question about what exactly is going on because I don't think we ever really know. I think that, yes, I think there are times when people are genuinely surprised. They genuinely don't know what's going on. That is true. And often maybe the parents being more narcissistic, more obsessed with their own self and their own lives, that they don't really tune into what's going on with their kids. So that is a possibility, or maybe the parent's traveling a lot, but you know, there could be different things where they don't see this happening. But also, there's a possibility that they do know what's going on. And there could be other explanations for why they stay. This was actually a really hard thing for me to watch, just to let you know, because although I did not experience sexual abuse or molestation, I did grow up with someone who had a very challenging personality in my father, and that all of us kids really, I understood what these boys were dealing with in many ways, not in all of the ways, but I really understood how difficult it was for them, and I think that's why I was compelled to talk about this, because I kept hearing either people are like, oh, free them, everything's good, no problem, what happened, which is, shocking on one end, and, throw the book at them, keep them in jail forever, put them to death, people being rather harsh, completely unsympathetic and no empathy for what's going on. So I think there's really a more nuanced tale, and it's a more difficult one. So with Kitty, I think, I'm always interested because the somebody who might have these things, like if Jose had dark triad or he just had aspects of them, he certainly was a very controlling, domineering, authoritarian presence where he was abusing these kids, rather physically, emotionally, yelling, controlling behavior, demanding behavior, and having conditional love. All of those things can be extremely difficult to work with. And what does that do to Kitty? What do you think?
Well, on the show, it talks about that the dad had cheated on her and she still stayed, and how she was like addicted almost to the dad.
That's very interesting you say that, because I'm thinking, she probably had something that at the time was identified as battered woman syndrome. We now call it battered person syndrome because we now realize that you can be a battered person. You don't have to be just a woman. But back then, we thought this only happened to women. We thought that the man, who was always the controlling, manipulative one, and the battered person was always a wife. Like we were pretty rigid with our, well, not me personally. But that
society.
was society. We're in psychological society. So let's talk about Kitty Menendez, because I really wanted to look at the battered woman syndrome and look at the cycle of the battered woman syndrome. Basically, what happens in battered woman syndrome is first things start somewhat normal. And then because the person's probably more narcissistic, more impulsive, more sociopathic, whatever, they kind of are left with unmet needs and unresolved issues. And this can lead to more anxiety, insecurity, depression. And so they'll really seek love. They'll really try to be a better wife, a better partner, a better person. And they'll do that, and they can find temporary relief. They can please and appease their partner and just be just that wonderful thing, and the partner continues to be controlling and abusive. And then when the partner becomes controlling and abusive, you can start being afraid or withdrawn or angry, and it starts to cause all these emotions to come out. And then you kind of go through this reconciliation process, and it goes back to normal. To really shorten it, to say that often what happens is there's a sweet, coming together. The person who's in the abused position will often try to be their best. The person who's the abuser will often snap, and sometimes it's rather unpredictable. And then there'll be generally a reconciliation. It can involve flowers. It can involve jewelry. It can involve, I'm sorry, I'll never do that again, baby. I love you more than anything. And they want to believe it. They want to believe it. And so they go back and they get involved in this addictive cycle in the relationship. So it becomes more and more difficult. And we could talk about this all day, because this syndrome can actually expand in a number of ways. But it may have helped explain why Kitty stayed there, and that she was dealing with her own control and authoritarian partner. And she was doing what she had to do. I think they portrayed this well in the series, because I think they were in Muncie, Indiana, and she had this beautiful compound, and she was standing out there getting something done. And I think, no, they were back in LA. I forget where, maybe they were in Calabasas. I can't remember where they were. I guess the boys were caught stealing in Calabasas, and just I think a year before the murder. And Jose comes home and says, I bought a house, we're moving. We have to get out of this neighborhood. Like, no talk to her, no, nothing. She's not in charge of her life. He's completely in charge of her life. He's doing what he wants. And she just has to go along.
And they bought the house because of the boy stealing?
Yeah, he thought in the show. Now, I don't know how true this is, because, again, these docudrama, it's not even a docu, it's more of a drama based on real events. You don't know how much is really there. But we could look in the series that was portrayed in the drama, and to say that they portrayed it well, to kind of show that he was humiliated by the boys having burglarized houses in Calabasas. And then he wanted to buy a house in Beverly Hills to get away from Calabasas because he was so embarrassed. I mean, humiliated. And this is really indicative of people who have narcissistic personality disorder, because they just can't suffer humiliation. They're very, very delicate. So it's really interesting. We often think of narcissists as very strong because they portray themselves that way, but they're very frail. And you can humiliate them rather easily. You can also manipulate them by flattering them. But the key is, he felt very humiliated because it was very public what happened. So he bought a house, I guess, in Beverly Hills and left. So let's go to and talk about what happened next. The brothers, then we want to focus on them. The brothers have a strained relationship with their parents, which is completely understandable. But I think what other people didn't see is they thought this was the perfect family. And I will tell you, when I do therapy with people, whenever people tell me they grew up in the perfect family, I'm not kidding. It's almost to a person. I grew up in the perfect family. We never had any problems. My parents were perfect. Everything was perfect. That there's usually something very dark hidden underneath. Because that's just not realistic. People aren't perfect. We're all imperfect. We all have stuff. People can have a good childhood. They can have a bad childhood. They typically don't have a perfect childhood.
Dang, that's scary. That's a nice red flag to look out for, you guys. If somebody tells you that they grew up with a perfect family, run.
Well, I wouldn't run, but they may have more of a story to tell. Because they may have themselves be suffering from a great deal of abuse. And they may just have wanted to paint it over with this public picture, which is often the case in these very domineering families, that they want to paint a picture of perfection, and that they will actually ask their victims to not talk about it, and to threaten them if they talk about it. And in fact, Eric said that in the trial, that he wanted his father to stop, and his father came back with a knife. Instead, if he ever told anyone, he would kill him. So it explores their lavish lifestyles after the murders. And so this was kind of a problem. The boys were really kind of screwed up. So they murdered their family. They stayed in the house. They murdered their parents, stayed in the house, and spent their money. Spent it wildly. They bought, cars and jewelry, Rolex, whatever, parties, like stuff. They just spent the money. And of course, it's kind of obvious maybe to us, because we're not 18 and 21, but that's like putting a big bullseye on yourself. It's like saying, hey, look at me, I'm the guilty one. But they were obviously, to me, going through a certain type of trauma response. So I wanted to talk about what may have been going on. I think that's what I was especially drawn to in this, that the movie doesn't portray, and they never really introduce some psychological explanations. What they did try to say was they used something in the trial called the abuse excuse. So they illustrated the sexual molestation of these boys. Oh, I forgot to say. This was because it was really realistic to me. I mean, everything rang true about the sexual molestation in many ways. But what was so interesting, that dad molested Lyle, the older child, and Lyle started to molest Eric. And this kind of dynamic happens as well. And that may be for a number of reasons. And it was interesting that Lyle apologized to Eric when he was giving testimony in the trial. And Eric said that was a significant moment for him because Lyle had never apologized for it. But we often see this in people who are getting abused, as they might then do it to somebody else. Maybe it's a brother or sister, maybe it's a neighborhood child. But it's
That's
a very
insane. I mean, I'm shook. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, Eric really got it. And it was just a very difficult situation for them both. So I wondered what could be some possible explanations. I mean, I don't know. Again, because I've not interviewed these boys, I only watched what other people watched. But I'm sympathetic here in a sense. I'm not sympathetic to the fact that they murdered their parents, but sympathetic to what was going on.
That's my big confliction. It's like, I mean, can you blame them? You know I know murder is wrong, but if somebody is abusing to that extreme and that's happening, it's I don't know what you can, what excuse you could give, for that to even be okay. So, I mean, I know it doesn't cancel it out either, but I'm just I don't know, as a parent, I don't know. I don't know. It's intense, but I don't know. Part of me is well, he kind of deserved it.
Well, it's very funny because I just had to watch this and think, I understand, but I still think the action is wrong.
Well, yeah, the action is wrong. Like I said, murder. And in the series, it's when they're talking to the therapist, Lyle's asking or telling him if he can say that he's a good person. No, it was Eric, I think, asking if
That's
he still
right.
thinks he's a good person, even though this thing happened, that they murdered their parents.
It's such a, that was very interesting you keyed in on that, because it's something I see with clients too, because people will often, when they've done something, they will assert or wonder about their own goodness. And I will try to help them to see that the action may not be good. But it doesn't mean that they themselves are not a good person. In fact, I try to avoid labeling somebody good or bad. I just try to say we're all people, good and bad, but that but the actions can be good or bad.
Yeah, and then it goes into that whole part of it where it's if it's in the moment and you kill them in the moment, where you're just self-defense while it's happening.
Yeah.
But they kind of planned the situation to murder their parents. I feel like that.
Which they did. Which they did. So it's not they asserted that they were afraid that their parents were going to kill them. Was that true? Who knows? But I do believe they were living in just sort of a constant trauma of what was going on. And so much so that, during these situations, people who experience this kind of abuse, they kind of drift in and out of, that's real life for them. It's just normal life. They don't think, oh, this is terrible. Like people who say, oh, they should have run away. They should have told somebody. I can tell you when I was a little kid, I thought, not only can I not tell somebody, but if I tell somebody, I'm going to get beaten up even more. So I thought that I cannot tell anyone because it would put me in danger. I really thought that. So
and I'm sure that's the same with a lot of people going through any abuse or trauma.
No, it's true. And I think the other thing that people think, because I used to think that, and I used to experience this, is when you did try to tell people, they wouldn't believe you.
And I think it's a different situation too with them being boys.
Yeah.
Instead of girls, where although it happens, like as society, we're kind of molded to think that doesn't really happen.
Right. That is true. So being a boy is going to protect them more than, is going to give the impression that they can't be hurt and they can't be sexually abused. And I think this was part in the first trial why it was a hung jury. All the women voted not guilty, or I guess to give them manslaughter or whatever it was, and they were trying to figure out in the trial. And all the men wanted to give them guilty of first-degree murder. So, which could lead to the death penalty here in California. So it was looking at which one of those, and the women were sympathetic, seeing this as real. And apparently, what came out is that the men didn't believe boys could be sexually abused. By the way, 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused. 1 in 6. So it's incredibly common. Incredibly common.
But that's the thing. It's like most guys won't speak out about it because of that situation. And like you said, even if you do speak out, then your whole image is painted completely different of you as a person too, you know?
That is true. That is true. Actually, on Netflix, they have a Menendez brothers documentary. They have a clip from the Oprah Winfrey Show. And there's an Oprah Winfrey Show where she does on male sexual abuse. And she has a whole audience of men. It's giving me goosebumps. A whole audience filled with men holding up pictures of the age they were when they were sexually abused. Wow. And it's incredibly powerful. It's an incredibly powerful visual.
Damn, I would watch that just to...
Well,
yeah.
So the boys were not dealing with a normal situation. And I think even if they weren't being sexually abused, the amount of emotional and physical abuse that they were experiencing was bad enough. But then we get in psychological abuse, but then we get into that, and it just really starts to really twist their understanding of the world. So we look at different phenomena. You know, one thing that came up for me as I was watching this, I was thinking of Stockholm Syndrome. So Stockholm Syndrome is a psychological phenomenon where the hostages bond with their captors. And you're like, Greg, they weren't hostages. These weren't captors. But when you're a child, you don't feel like you have any options. You have to comply. You're with your parents. You can't run away, or if you do, you can't get far. I think Eric did talk about somewhere that he tried to run away when he was a kid, but would only ever get to like his aunt's house. But that's totally normal kid running away, because they can still find you, and you have no idea what's going on. But you just want to get away from situations. So what happens in Stockholm Syndrome is a result, like when people are hostages, they start to develop empathy towards their aggressor. They even may take on their cause. There's a rationalization of their captor's behavior, like, oh, they're doing it for a good cause. They're doing it because of this or that. So they start to... It's adaptive. They start to take on characteristics of their captor. And it's adaptive because when you think about it, that could help them survive. So if you start thinking, this person's not as bad as all that, they've got these good qualities. And that was portrayed in this series because they saw their dad as this amazing human being, like a Greek god.
Yeah, even after they murdered them, how he gave that speech and was trying to do a book about him, and still saw him in like this great hero figure for him,
He was a great hero figure for them. The next one I thought was perhaps battered person syndrome, which we talked about, psychological conditioning resulting from prolonged domestic abuse. Key characteristics: you feel hopelessness or helplessness and fear, as well as hopelessness, belief that escape is impossible, and low self-esteem and self-blame. And this can actually cause people to have anxiety, depression, PTSD, and people will stay in abusive relationships. And then there's a third dynamic that's we often called like it's a defense mechanism, which is called identification with the aggressor, which is a little like Stockholm Syndrome. It's a defense mechanisms where victims adopt the behaviors of their aggressor. They mimic the aggressor's traits and attitudes, and they attempt to reduce anxiety through conformity. And what we did see in the show was Lyle really trying to be his dad in every way.
Even the way he treated Eric and manipulated him.
Even the way he treated Eric. So battered syndrome, we typically see more in battered person syndrome in domestic violence. We typically see Stockholm syndrome in high-profile kidnapping cases. Think Patty Hearst when she was... Patty Hearst, you have no idea who that is, do you?
No, I think I have heard of this, actually.
Yeah, she was taken by the Symbionese Liberation Army, and she became, like, one day, I think she was robbing a bank as this identity, Tanya, because she had taken on the identity. She had Stockholm syndrome, and many people called it at that time Patty Hearst syndrome. And then identification with the aggressor were situations in abusive relationships and hostile environments. So I really thought they were dealing with aspects of all of these things. I mean, we could look at one, but I think it goes beyond just battered person syndrome.
There was a lot.
There's a lot that they're having to deal with, and I think that's these things become extremely complicated. So I'm not excusing them, but I can understand the turmoil and difficulty they were dealing with, and they weren't seeing the world in a way perhaps someone else might see. And then they went to therapy, or Eric did. So because of that home break-in in Calabasas, they were sent to therapy. They found this therapist. Apparently, they went to several therapists. Jose found a therapist. He would only allow them to go to a therapist that he could get the therapist to sign an agreement to tell the father everything. I can't tell you how unusual that is. Even if he's a minor, which I think he was 17 at the time, I would not do it. There would be no way. I would say that, we would come to an agreement. I would come to an agreement with the parent to say if there's anything serious where they're putting themselves or others in danger, or they're being abused, or these kinds of general confidentiality things that we do try to talk to parents about, and we would get everyone to agree with the child in the room, the whole thing. I don't see children, so it's not really much of a problem, but this is, if I were to do something like this. But he found this therapist, and so Eric and Lyle had to go to this therapist as part of their probation. It's like a totally normal thing that has to happen to get the court side off in the document. This was Dr. Jerome Oziel. He was a psychologist, but when they went to see him, his license was already on probation. Which cracks me up. So and we'll talk about that, but it's like this guy was already a problem in the Netflix documentary, or not documentary, I'm sorry, in the Netflix drama series, Monsters, they portray him as a real sleazebag. And I don't know. I think, even if he wasn't that interpersonally sleazy, that his actions really were. And let me talk about what those were. So Eric confides in his therapist, Dr. Jerome Oziel, and confesses. He originally saw them in 1988. And Dr. Oziel apparently records their sessions, and that those recordings often later become evidence. And let's talk about how that happened. So he asked in the show Eric to say every detail. Immediately, as a therapist, I'm watching this and going, that's the wrong approach. Somebody just tells you that they murdered their parents. You don't go, tell me every detail. Let's get every single detail on the table. This is actually important to know for trauma treatment and treating PTSD to go down that road. But I might really start with what's happening in that moment. So I was like completely floored by why they would portray this therapist doing this, but it later makes sense. And it's interesting because we don't often think about, that murders are not unusual. A quarter of all murders apparently involve family members. So this kinds of thing can happen. As you said, Eric was asking him if he's a good person. He also asserted that he's not a bad person. But Eric did in the show portray that he was having PTSD. So when I was saying, this is like classic PTSD, so maybe I didn't really know. I mean, I knew some things, but I thought maybe it was just an awkward portrayal of PTSD treatment. But he says, I'm having nightmares where I'm shooting them. And he says, I can't sleep. The only time I can sleep is when I blow off my head, which really indicates a PTSD process. And he was having PTSD with suicidal ideation.
Which is crazy. Well, I mean, I don't know, but was Lyle having the same PTSD? I don't think so, right?
They were not portraying that in the show.
In the show, yeah. That's why I was like, it only seemed like Eric was the one that was cracking.
Eric was cracking. And in fact, would they have ever gotten caught had Eric not cracked? Because Eric was distraught from the moment they did it. I mean...
And Lyle just seemed like he moved on like nothing had happened. And I felt bad for Eric because if Lyle would have protected Eric and have been there for him, maybe, I don't think Eric would have had to go to the therapist and cracked,
Perhaps so.
Where I'm like, dang, his own selfishness that he picked up from his dad kind of bit him in the butt.
Perhaps so. So in the show, the therapist is very manipulative. He urges confession. He has both boys come in together to talk about it. He says, we're in this together, that he can help them, and then asks the boys to invest in a company he's starting called Automax. And then says, I can be more than a therapist to you. I can be a business partner. I mean, this is as bad as it gets. So he's trying to get almost, it seemed, at least they were portraying, he's trying to get leverage on his clients and then asking them to invest with their millions that they were set to inherit, from for his business. So it was terrible. So let me just go over why this is so bad, because it got worse. Let me get into what was even worse. He had Judalon Smith come down. Judalon Smith was a woman he was having an affair with. He was married with children, and he had her listen into the therapy sessions. Listen in. So I was understanding when I was back in 1989 when the story first broke that she was listening through like a hole in the wall or something like that in the TV show they portrayed that she was listening at the door, but also that she was the one that taped the sessions. He had her tape the sessions, but in the show they portray him as getting permission from the boys. So I don't know what the truth is there. I think there's some conflicting evidence because it was known at the time that, or the belief was at the time that he had her tape them. Who is Dr. Oziel? He has his clinical doctorate in clinical psychology from Arizona State University, a completely good place, great place. Lived in South Carolina for 2 years. I think he got his doctorate in the 70s, though, the early 70s, which which maybe things were a little looser back then, but still. I don't remember them being that loose because when I was in school, the professors were not flipping out, but were horrified about his actions. So it was not like it was done to break confidentiality at the time. He moved to Beverly Hills. He taught at USC, and he was purported expert in phobias and wrote articles that dealt with sex-related disorders. And when Jose found him, he was on probation by the California State Board of Psychology for an improper dual relationship where he exchanged therapy for work done around the house by a construction worker. So the guy's already a problem. Then he gets this woman to listen in on the therapy session with the boys, which is just terrible. And
who's he having an affair with, too?
He's having an affair with, but guess what? She's a former client.
Oh, no.
So I guess I have trouble looking at him in a positive way. He allowed her to audio tape the session with the boys and to make copies. I can't even imagine. Make copies. And he was saying in the show, because he's afraid for his life. If you're afraid for your life as a therapist, guess what? You end the therapy relationship. That is actually the protocol. If you're afraid of your client, if your client makes a threat to you, you have to end the therapy at that moment, because at that moment you can't have therapy anymore, because your fear is not conducive for therapy. You have to just end the therapy. You can get them out of your office and end the therapy, but you have to end the therapy. That is just ethical protocol.
And then, like, for this situation, like how they confessed the murder, like I know you guys have confidentiality stuff that you guys can't say anything, but it's like, what do you do in this situation?
Let's talk about confidentiality. So California Evidence Code 1010, the code establishes confidentiality communications between a therapist and a client. Let me go over those things really quickly. Danger to self or others. If someone were to is going to do something that could cause someone else to die, or the property of a person where someone could be killed, then we actually are obligated reporters. We have mandated reporters. We have to report that to the police and try to warn the victims. That is actually the law in the state of California. That is the Tarasoff law. If somebody threatens harm to themselves, we have the option of breaking confidentiality, the option to try to protect them. We're not mandated, but at the same time, all bets are off. If someone says they're going to kill themselves, then we can feel free to call the police, call a relative, whatever, to try to get that person safe or get them committed, whatever it is. We now have that option. Child abuse. If a child is being abused at this time, whether they're doing it or someone else is doing it, and they tell us about it, like so-and-so child is being abused at this time, we are obligated. We are mandated reporters. Elder or dependent person abuse. It's the same as child abuse, but if your dependent person is between 18 and 64, but they can't take care of themselves, or 65 and older, where they're being abused, including financial abuse or financial neglect. I mean, there could be lots of ways that this could happen. We are mandated reporters. But there's also court orders. A court can go, hey, you have to turn over your records. They don't do that easily. A court did that in this case. We'll go back to that. And legal proceedings. If a client brings up their mental health status in a court of law and they're giving that as an excuse for a crime they committed, guess what? They've just given up all their confidentiality.
But in this case, with them confessing to the murder,
that's not reportable. So I went through all the things because I want to illustrate that we have a lot, but if someone's already committed a crime, we are not only not mandated reporters, we can't tell. It is actually against the law.
I did see this in another show called Evil as well, too, where she murdered somebody and told her therapist, and he couldn't do anything.
He can't.
Yeah.
So it's not only that we have the option to keep our mouths shut, we can't. Because the theory is, of course, that then you have to just deal with what's in front of you. You're not preventing anything. It's already happened. Now, if something else is going to happen and you get word of that, then you're obligated. Or you as a therapist could end the relationship if you feel you can't manage that particular issue, because it's certainly if that's beyond your scope, and that would be on most therapists' scope. So it's a tough one. But in that instance, Eric came in pain wanting to deal with this, and the therapist maybe didn't take the best route.
he saw an opportunity.
That's what it seemed like. And I was just a little horrified about the whole thing. By the way, he no longer has a license. His license was taken in 1992. I can't remember. It was 93. Like, it wasn't too long ago. Maybe 97. Board of Psychology took his license away. Let me see if I can find this. Yeah, they took his license away, basically for having sex with a patient, and maybe it was her. I don't know if that was the patient, and for breaking confidentiality, because that wasn't a small break of confidentiality. That was a big giant break. You don't record your sessions without patients knowing. He's in the series, in the Ryan Murphy series, they seem to know, but so I don't know what the truth is. But even if they know, I don't record sessions. I guess I would record a session if it were like for a reason. Let's record this session for this reason, not for rando reasons.
Yeah, that was just a big, like, dang. I don't know. You just saw everything spiral from there on the show. Yeah, it's scary.
So they did. They had Dr. Oziel testify at the first trial, and he was such a mess that that probably played a role in the mistrial. And then they only played one of the taped confessions in the second trial, and that taped confession just made, I think it was of Lyle, or maybe the two of them, but they both looked. They both look bad at that point. Dr. Oziel denied any wrongdoing, but gave up his license without contesting, alleging he wasn't living in the state any longer. Oh, I don't need that thing anymore, that little thing. I'm telling you. He moved to New Mexico. He's living in Albuquerque, and he works as a staff member at something called the Marital Mediation Center. Now, the Marital Mediation Center sounds like a nice organization. They help couples through difficult problems. It's to try to help them not get divorced. So if they're dealing with something very difficult, they'll try to help them not get divorced. So it actually sounds like a very nice organization. But man,
do you think he should have anything to do with advice on people at this point? I mean, I wouldn't want to take advice from this guy.
Those in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, and I'm in a glass house. At the same time, I was kind of shocked, and I felt for this because there were so many things that went bad in this, and one could say, well, they got caught for doing this thing they did. They probably would have eventually got caught because the police were already going, wait a minute, this doesn't add up.
And it's Beverly Hills Police. They get paid a lot to do their job.
And there's
correctly.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
There's 10 cops for every one citizen. So
pretty much.
It's like, that's why that town buzzes the way it does.
Yeah. And where they lived in the flats, it's like they'd be there instantly.
Oh, instantly. Yeah. No. So if you don't know the area that's portrayed in the Netflix series, it's in the most accessible, easy area of Beverly Hills, and really, in my opinion, one of the nicest areas. I absolutely love it. There's we call it the Beverly Hills Flats because there's a hills part as well. But the Beverly Hills Flats has these big, incredible, beautiful mansions, one after the other, and they're just huge and beautiful. I've been in several, and you're just like, each one is a very interesting, wonderful place,
Even driving through that area, you're just like in awe because it's everything's perfect. Lawns are manicured every day. Like it's perfection. What the dad wanted.
It was what the dad wanted. Yeah. It was what the dad wanted. It was perfection. And I think that's what floored everyone. And again, to go all the way back, this is why this was grabbed onto us back in the late 80s and has persisted to this very day, which led to this LA Times ad, Justice for Eric and Lyle, why you have Kim Kardashian hailing their cause, why you have Rosie O'Donnell talking about them. I mean, you've got significant people who are trying to get them out. And I don't know, I have to say, again, the action is very bad, but what they went through was very bad. And I think, and like I said about me and glass houses, also me in glass houses and anyone who grew up in a challenging situation. And I didn't grow up in as bad of a situation as certainly these boys had. Even though they were very wealthy and they had a lot going for them, they're obviously very smart, but they were very, very abused.
And then do you also think, like with the series and the documentary, and I know new things have come up for their trial and everything, does this paint them in a certain way, or does you think this would help them almost? Because, the public sees this.
I think it's going to help them because there's a whole trend on TikTok now where everyone's like, justice for Eric and Lyle. And I think that people get very black and white. It kind of bugs me. Mm-hmm. It really bugs me because they're like, I watched a 5-minute clip on TikTok and now I'm an expert. Like, come on, folks.
Yeah. No.
So, although I've expressed my dismay and my sympathy and empathy, I have to step back and really have some feeling of confliction. I'm conflicted about this entire thing because although I think they did do this, the proper thing we do in our society is put people in jail for these kinds of actions. We also don't have sympathy for what they went through and what so many people in jail go through. And one day we'll talk about my issue with how we incarcerate. I'm not a flaming liberal here, but we've got some problems with incarceration if the goal is to punish behavior. Because what we do with incarceration actually creates problems, a lot of problems.
Yeah, we definitely need to talk about that. That's a whole situation. And the legal system, too, where the legal system sometimes, is wrong. Just plain out wrong.
No, that can certainly happen. And there are people that are, we look at the Central Park Five who are now suing former President Trump for having talked in the debate and still holding to that case. The Central Park Five, if you don't know, go look it up. Go look on the Wikipedia page. It's a travesty that happened. I happened to be living in New York when the Central Park Five came out. So I just, I'm like Forrest Gump of citizens who happen to be in the cities where things happen. But, it was a very difficult thing. And so we've got to understand what happens to people. And the Central Park Five is a good example of people who are unjustly convicted of crimes they did not commit.
And it happens.
And it happens. Yeah. But here they did. And they admitted to it. And, it was all very straightforward. But yet we can look and say, wow, what they went through is pretty bad. And we really kind of need to understand how bad things can get.
Yeah, and how we approach the whole situation of abuse even,
Yes.
Like,
so just to wind up, I wanted to go and give a statement from the family because I think it was important. The family did respond. I told Brian, I have a statement from the family. He said, what did you say, Brian?
Oh, about how wait.
You said every
documentary, the family always speaks out and they're upset about like the way they're portrayed or the story wasn't fully done well. I mean, some things, they just need ratings.
Well, this is from Eric's aunt, Joan Vandermolen, and the entire Menendez family, and they sent this statement to the Monsters documentary and Ryan Murphy in particular, and they say, we are virtually the entire family of Eric and Lyle Menendez. We are 24 strong today, and we want the world to know we support Eric and Lyle. We individually and collectively pray for their release, imprisoned after 35 years. We love them, want them home with us. And they go on to say about this show, they call it phobic, gross, anachronistic, which is like based in the time period, serial, episodic nightmare that is not only riddled with mistruths and outright falsehoods, but ignores the most exculpatory revelations. Exculpatory is like the things that could mitigate or maybe even excuse sometimes, but to at least to help you to understand that maybe this wasn't all that people thought. And they called it a grotesque shock-a-drama. I mean, they're good with words, let's face it. But they really went after Dominic Dunn because they said that Ryan Murphy based a lot of his stuff on Dominic Dunn. And if you watch the series, you see kind of a guy, kind of a Truman Capote type, who's the author, and he's talking about things. And he wrote a very big expose. I think it was in Vanity Fair, and he followed the trial, and he was just wanted to see these boys convicted. In fact, it seemed like everyone did, and the tide really turned against them, and public opinion was very much against them. But Dominic Dunn was a big part of this, and they said that Lyle and Eric, the story of Lyle and Eric in Monsters was largely based on his portrayal rather than maybe some interviews with them. So was really a tragic situation. So I had to feel for the family too. And this really goes to show you when somebody is murdered that there are ripple effects that continue to affect everybody around them for years. It doesn't stop with the murder. People think, murder, it's over. People move on. So I say this when people threaten suicide. No, I go, people never get over suicide. Never. Oh, yeah, no, they'll get on. They'll move on with their lives. Again, they might move, but they won't move on. I go, they'll have emotional upset for the rest of their lives about what happened, wondering what they did, how they were guilty, et cetera, et cetera. And there was so much in this story that kind of rang true of, the relatives, the parents. One of the cousins actually was told when Lyle was 8 that when Lyle was 8, she was a little girl, and Lyle told her he was being abused by his dad. He said his dad touched him.
So that was my
in his
train of
genital.
thought when the whole thing about the family speaking out and how they have their back and everything. It's like, yeah, it's easy to say behind a keyboard and just, to make your statement, but it's like, where was the family the entire time these kids were
No,
being
the family
abused?
knew. The family all testified that, he was really a very, very difficult, and I'm being very nice here, difficult person, and that he, and the one cousin did get, Lyle told her. She said that she went up and told the mother. The mother came downstairs and said to Eric, and she said nothing, took the child back upstairs and didn't believe her. Wouldn't believe her. Just took Eric upstairs.
Damn.
So he took him out, wouldn't say a thing. So I think this is really shocking, and again, we look at these roles of these people in this family. I think it's a dark story and one we can all continue to talk about, but I think we've probably overstayed our time as it is.
Yes.
Thank you so much. That does wrap up the show for today. I know this was a tough one to talk about. I had written down a thing for... Okay, well, if you go to our YouTube page, youtube.com/Dr. Greg, I'll have resources you can contact. Because I didn't put them here. But there are several resources to talk to if you or someone has been abused and you want to talk about it. If you like the show for today, please like, subscribe, give us 5 stars. Also, if you have any questions, hit us up. Hit Brian or us up at Ask Dr. Greg. Until then, this is Dr. Greg, Brian, and Jamie bidding you farewell. So be present, be flexible, and be kind.